Guy, it's
So, did you come to Tropic Star that year we met?
I met you in Tropic Star.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Just confirming the connection. Because
Prior
it's
to
been
like
a while,
the charter plane, over there.
Yeah.
I think you're getting ready to leave. You were standing on the tarmac or near the tarmac when we were.
We're going there next week. So.
Oh, sweet.
And
Awesome.
in December and in January.
You like Tropic Star?
You go there 3 times a year?
We have a big research project going on down there, which we can talk about.
Sure.
It's been going on for 6 years now.
What guy to start with?
Yeah.
I must say, I saw you and your son Alex maybe a year ago. We spoke about this podcast, and you said yes, for sure you would do it. But usually these type of promises get lost somewhere down the line. I just want to say thank you for coming by on your way to receive this award tonight. You're really a busy man. First off, what's this award you're receiving tonight?
To be honest with you, and thank you very much for having me today, and I'm glad we could squeeze this in, especially after the boat show, which was kind of hectic, as it always is. It's really great to come to your house and see all your collection of art and sculptures, which you're so like me. I'm surrounded by all this. It's not paraphernalia, it's stuff that's really important to you.
Sure.
At different times in your life, and it's just wonderful to see somebody else who's so like-minded.
And it's funny because you know these guys, and you said that you've traded some of your art for their work.
Yeah.
So what's this award you're going to receive tonight?
It's, it's up at the Manatee Lagoon. It's being hosted by Florida Power and Light, who happens to be one of our sponsors at the Guy Harvey Foundation of the Marine Science Education Initiative. They're actually quite a big sponsor. And my daughter works with them very closely. I've had very little to do with that side of the foundation's work. Because I concentrate on the research side. I'm a fisheries scientist by profession, so this is my avenue. So it's, I think, in recognition of, 25 years worth of research, education, and conservation, which are all related, as you well know.
Sure.
And so it's the first time they've ever given out this award, Andy. So I'm not quite sure what it's for, but it's a great
honoring
honor.
You for your lifetime.
Well, it's we are a we. We're not an
sure,
I.
Yeah,
and
right.
so it's tons of people who are getting this.
Yeah. You made mention of the Guy Harvey Foundation at the boat show last week. You had a monumental Wednesday night.
We did.
How much money did you raise that night?
We grossed $405,000.
Beautiful.
Which is pretty good for a small organization.
You know, it's interesting when you take a look at your resume. Your profound artwork is incredible, but also, too, if you take a look at all the honors that you've received over the years.
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, if
now you're going to embarrass me.
I mean, it's really quite amazing in the fact that you were in the, obviously the International Game Fish Association Hall of Fame. Okay, you're recognized with a Lifetime Achievement Award from them, but you're a member of the International Swimming Hall of Fame, the Gold Medal Award, the Jamaican Committee Award of Excellence.
Right.
I mean, it goes on and on. Right. Countries have honored you. The International Scuba Diving Hall of Fame. Right. But mostly this is all because of your conservation work, right?
Yes. The conservation part comes out of being a scientist and understanding the issues, having worked with fish all my life. Let me go back a little bit, because our family is from Jamaica. We got there in 1664, which is like 9 years after the British drove the Spanish out of Jamaica. Jamaica was first discovered by Columbus in 1494. The Spanish colonized it by 1503. And they stayed for 150 years and basically annihilated the indigenous Indians, who were called the Arawaks. And then the British, because it had no gold, the Spanish weren't really interested in Jamaica. They wanted gold. That's what they were exploring the New World for. And so they retreated basically to Central America and kind of gave up Jamaica to the British. Well, they got driven out in 1655. And Jamaica was very strategic for any navy. You know, it had lots of resources to feed an army or a navy or whatever, and lots of wood and all that stuff, big ports. The Kingston Harbour itself, where Port Royal was based at the entrance to Kingston Harbour, was the 7th biggest natural harbour in the world. And it's just so well protected by all these fortifications and places. So you heard about the famous city of Port Royal. Well, that's actually where I worked, where the Marine Lab was. And it went under water in the 1692 earthquake that sank the city. And it had to be completely rebuilt. But the history of the British has remained ever since, right through to 1962 when they became independent. But my family came to Jamaica in 1664, which is 9 years after they took over. And we've been there ever since. So it was really hard to leave, as I did in 1999, to leave Jamaica to go to Grand Cayman, which is where we live now, which is still a British Crown colony. It's still British and not even a self-governing country. A very stable place to live. Lots of great flats, lots of bonefish, permit and tarpon, and quiet compared to Jamaica. So that's the history of growing up in Jamaica. And I went to the university there, did my doctorate, the University of the West Indies. I was in the army there for 10 years, Navy really. So deep history in Jamaica, and we just had to upend and leave because Kingston is a big city with a lot of poor people and a dangerous place, and everybody carried a gun.
Crazy.
It was crazy. And there were, having traveled a lot, doing the fishing work, doing the research work, you see other places that are not that involved or, just plain dangerous to live in. And we got very lucky. We had a few bad scrapes, and it was just time to leave. But we go back a lot. Both my wife and I have a lot of family still in Jamaica, so we visit often. And it's only 45 minutes flight.
I've always heard about the tarpon. You used to get a swim with the tarpon in the Cayman Islands.
You still can. Yeah.
I mean, it's a very great tourist attraction. Yeah. But let's go.
And we have them in Jamaica too, by the way. Lots of tarpon because we've got rivers. Cayman has no rivers, so there isn't that freshwater influence that you need to get the really big ones.
So we're going to get back to a little bit more of the conservation stuff a little bit, but I'd like to back up with your artwork because I think most people know you for your T-shirts, your artwork, and now your artwork is on buildings and ships, airports. Do you remember the first thing that you drew that you thought, wow, this is really cool?
Well, I do. We grew up on a cattle farm about 20 miles inland at 1,500 feet elevation, which had, as I expressed, had been handed down to the family for generations. And I was lucky that both our parents were very outdoorsy. My dad being ex-British Army, he was a hell of a shot. He was a very keen bird watcher. Bird shooter. My mother was the antithesis. She was a very good shot, but she was a very good naturalist. And an avid bird watcher, and had an artistic streak in her as well. So when I was 5, 6, 7, on the veranda at our farmhouse there, sketching stuff, she was paying a lot of interest because I was painting stuff I could see around me. And on both sides of the family, there are artists. So her side and my dad's side had accomplished artists, and somehow the gene jumped off into me.
For sure.
There's no doubt about this. And it coincided with not really enjoying too much of the horse riding and the land stuff, and preferring to go fishing with dad or spearfishing or snorkeling and doing stuff like that as a kid and a teenager. And that evolved into wanting to become a marine scientist.
Were you doodling fish at the time, or what were you drawing?
Everything. I was doing cows, tractors, landscapes, all sorts of things. But the fish caught my attention from early on, and especially when they brought back fish, from their fishing trips. And then we were old enough to go out in the boat. Andy, we started fishing in a dugout canoe, made of a tree with an outboard engine on the back, and bamboo outriggers.
Wow! And what were you fishing for?
Anything, inshore stuff would be barracudas, mackerels, kingfish, offshore stuff, because the deep water comes close to shore.
Right.
And most islands in the Caribbean, so you don't have to go very far. So the blue marlin was always the sort of ultimate goal.
Right.
And to cut a long story short, I became infatuated with the blue marlin. It was just the ultimate sea creature to me.
Was that something that you'd seen because you lived near that kind of fishing, or was it that marlin that your mom first caught that I read about?
In my latest book, which is called 10,000 Chicken Sandwiches.
10,000 chicken sandwiches?
Well, that's
what's that about?
How did you get that title?
I should have brought you a copy of that. I'll send it to you because it's all in black and white. Because I inherited her diaries and all her photos when she passed, and I'm a bit like her in that we wrote copious notes, kept diaries, kept very detailed photo albums, all meticulously named and numbered and dated and everything. But it was all in black and white. And so this was fabulous reference for my latest book, which was the story of using that same boat, the cotton tree canoe with the outboard engine, and catching their first marlins, and they didn't know what to do, and they're using linen line and dead bait fishing and all this stuff.
Were they in that canoe when they caught that marlin?
No, not the first one I saw with the broken bill. They caught several before that, before we were big enough to go in that boat.
But in that canoe,
yeah,
they were going offshore. I've seen these guys in Venezuela go out there in these small little boats in the middle and right off the La Guaira bank.
Yeah, at night too. We see them at night. The thing is that because you got deep water close to shore, you can paddle out there.
Sure.
And the guys with handline, they get live bait, live sprats, sardines, or whatever, and catch anything they wanted.
To go back to your drawing, when you were a kid and you started drawing and doodling, was it your way to escape? Like, did you?
I was really infatuated with big fish, and what accelerated this whole process, Nick, was my mum giving me a copy of Hemingway's book, The Old Man and the Sea, to read, and I was like, how can a guy write so eloquently about the fish I love? I'm 12, 13 years old, and I would read it all the time. And it was just fascinating. And of course, I wanted to meet Hemingway and do all this stuff, but he was dead already. But my penmanship, especially pen and ink work, was really progressing extremely well. And I would do a lot of Jamaican scenes, country scenes, beach scenes, and fish in pen and ink work. And between high school and university, I really botched up my exams to go into university from high school. So I had to do some resits. Very embarrassing. And so I went to what they call a crammer in Scotland and had to do 2 subjects again and get a high enough grade to get into university. And in the meantime, I took it upon myself to illustrate the entire story of The Old Man and the Sea, because the version that Mum had given me didn't have any drawings in it. And I subsequently found another version, a hardback copy, with 2 different British artists who had done really not very good drawings of marlins. And I said, I can do much better than this.
At 12, you said that?
No, this is 17 now.
Oh, 17.
So I've been reading the story since I was 12.
Right.
So I took it upon myself, did this. I did 44 drawings in a year, and I just sat on them. But it was the start of something big for me, and I didn't know it at the time. And then, goodness gracious, it had to be 10 years later. I had my first one-man art show in Jamaica at a reputable gallery, and we made some prints of, I think, 12 out of the 44. We made prints to follow the story, and we made them available. And we sold pretty much all of the prints. There were 100 sets of 12. And I donated a set to the IGFA, 1986.
Wow.
And they went for some astronomical figure. I was selling the series for like $200 US for 12 beautiful black and white prints. And it opened my eyes. So 86, Lauderdale Boat Show, Kay Pearson, show management guy who became a close friend. He just kept sending all his best buddies to come and buy my art, and we sold out of everything. And I was like, man, this is really working. So
that's what lit the fire of this could work.
That lit the fire from a commercial perspective. And also, quite a few Floridians would come down to Jamaica to fish our tournaments. I was selling paintings for $20 at not Montego Bay, the Port Antonio Marlin tournament, the big one. And these guys said, "Man, your stuff is great. I know somebody who could use you." And it turned out to be Rolly Working, who owned T-Shirts of Florida, who you know very well, world record holder probably 50 times over. And he said, this whole process of printing color on T-shirts is evolving, and I need your work to try and get some fish out.
Interesting. So you guys.
So that was together. 86 too. Yeah.
That's when you started printing T-shirts.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it just went from there to a 38-year career in doing that.
It's amazing. Wherever you go in the world, around a fishing dock or fishing, you see the Guy Harvey T-shirts.
Oh, thank goodness!
I mean, my God, how many T-shirts do you think you've sold?
A lot.
How many? Come on,
how many?
Give us a number.
It's way in the millions. It would have been
10.
Andy, I really have no idea. I know how many paintings I've painted because I keep a meticulous record of that. But I've done our digital library has over 3,000 different pieces of art.
Wow!
So I'm prolific.
Yeah.
Everything from 20-foot long paintings on canvas to little tiny ink sketches.
Right.
What do you think when you see someone wearing one of your T-shirts?
It's very gratifying, I have to say, because it's a wonderful business to be in. It makes people happy. It makes them think about going fishing or want to go fishing. They love the art, and when we diversified and got into more female styles as well, and colors and silhouettes and stuff like that, we recruited a whole new type of audience, basically.
Right, market. Yeah.
I think the best thing is for some of my appearances at Bass Pro Shops or at the boat shows when a 3-generation family walks into your booth, son, dad, and granddad, and they're all wearing Guy Harvey shirts.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
It's very cool. Yeah.
Do you get stopped like in the airport and in the restaurants all the time?
Well, not all the time, but from time to time.
A lot.
Does it ever get annoying?
No.
It's an honor and a privilege, right?
It is, absolutely. And the very fact that they, want to engage is just wonderful, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you ever have a mentor or anybody that helped you in the early phases of your artwork?
That's a great question because I am self-taught. I taught myself fish illustration using pen and ink, using cross-hatching and stippling, just meticulous work. And then people would buy that and they would say, especially the ladies, "Can you add some color to this?" So I would dabble with watercolor and add watercolor to the pen and ink. And it didn't smear because it's fast Indian ink. And so the combination evolved too, and I did bigger watercolors. It's a very spontaneous medium, and you have to work very quickly with it to use the water and let it move itself on the paper, whereas the ink is like mind-numbing boredom in terms of stippling sometimes or doing the cross-hatching and covering the area. So it was refreshing. And then I was doing a little bit of oil painting at the time because I wanted to paint the fish more life-size, especially the bigger game fish. So you had to go to canvas because with paper you got a limit of about 3 feet in terms of size of the paper, and it starts to wrinkle. And I'm glad I did because I think my best pieces nowadays are all the big pieces. And we shoot them, we reduce them down into prints to sell them small size, and they look much better reduced.
What's it look like, and how hard is it in the magnitude of painting big murals and walls and airports and cruise ships? Well,
there are many years between doing all of these, so let me start at the beginning.
Sure.
Murals are a challenge, and the guy who taught me how to do them most cost effectively was Wyland, who, as you know, paints more marine mammals. And
he's down in the Keys, right?
He's based in the Keys. But he's done them all over the world, and he's very, very prolific. One of the hardest working guys I've ever met. And he'll paint on any kind of surface. This is the challenge. Somebody says there's a wall there, it's either brick or it's got rough concrete or whatever. There's no way you can finish that off with a paintbrush or even a roller. You have to use a spray gun. And so that covers a multitude of sins really quickly. And so he was the guy who said, this is what you do. he was definitely the mentor for that. And he used it to really promote his business his way. He's probably one of the best self-promoters in the business I've ever met. My style didn't really lean toward murals. And you mentioned the cruise ship. It was a great honor to be asked by Norwegian Cruise Line to paint the hull of one of their biggest ships, 1,200 feet long. And we did that, of course, with my graphic artist using existing art that we spaced along the hull on a computer, and then, seeking approval from Norwegian all the time. It was a lengthy process, but it worked. And then they were, let me go back to 2015 it was. We started the process in 2014. I went to the shipyard in Germany when the ship was being built, and they had a wonderful time-lapse of the 5 artists or painters who actually painted it on the ship. They projected the images, they drew around it, they put tape on it to get the nice hard lines, and they used these giant rollers and painted, I think it was 13 different animals, starting with a 150-foot-long sailfish on the bow.
It's incredible.
And I wish I had a picture
I was going to ask you about
Yeah.
that. So you probably took a photograph of what you wanted on the boat and stood
Yeah.
back and projected it, like you said,
Well, they did,
with
yeah.
the lights.
Yeah.
So you could actually trace.
Yeah.
Actually trace the image.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what they did. But it took them 3 months to do both sides of the ship.
Oh my gosh.
But the time lapse is amazing. I'm so glad they did that. And then when it first came to Miami for the inaugural cruise at the end of 2015, it was outside that huge hangar in which they built not one but 2 ships at once. I mean, astounding building. It was in the sunlight, and you could see all the colors and just how well executed. They're Germans, they do everything absolutely meticulously. And so it was a real tribute.
Yeah,
And,
for sure.
we had the to go with that experience. We had the in the in-cabin television system. We had the Guy Harvey channel with all our TV shows and documentaries and Jessica's documentaries. A 24-hour loop of content for the clients to look at. So we got them at both ends,
How often do you paint a piece and it doesn't reach your standard and you toss it?
I never toss one. I actually redid one the other day. It's funny you should ask. It's not very often. And especially a piece that may have been around for a while. And I see an anatomical correction I got to make, or the light's not right, or, some of these other artists you got here, Mike Stidham and Al Barnes and what else you got? Stanley Meltzoff. Their use of light, especially in shallow water scenes, is incredible. And you can only do that and paint it accurately if you've been there, which brings me to another point I want to make.
Well, it's interesting because that's what attracted me most to the underwater genre, is because the refractive light on fish. And Stanley Meltzoff, I used to own one of his pieces, and you see him underwater with a palette and oil. With scuba gear. Is that just a
gimmick,
setup?
yeah.
Is that a gimmick? I looked at it and go, oh my God.
He admitted to that, yeah.
But
So that was just for the photo?
Yeah, absolutely. With no mask on either. I know the catalog you're talking about. Yeah.
That's funny.
Did you have any artists that you really loved?
A lot of them, and I've collected their work. And going back to the mentors, apart from the parents, Ken Ullberg became my mentor. If there ever was one, really. I mean, apart from the influence of Hemingway as well, just on my thoughts and love for the blue marlin and the billfish. We share that same passion. Kent was doing his big piece at the Broward County Convention Center in 1987. Came to my stand at the Miami Boat Show and said, "Good God, Harvey, I've been dying to meet you. Your work is bloody good." I said, "Ken, your stuff is amazing too, And so we hit it off right away. We agreed to do joint exhibitions from then on. We did them for 2 decades. Kent's getting on now, so he's over 80. So, that's a lot of hard work. But he's still doing monumental sculptures. But he, in between the customers that we dealt with at the shows, he would say and critique the work. He said, he didn't call me an illustrator. He said, your technique is very hard. You use a lot of
Sharp
hard lines,
edges.
sharp edges, and you can soften it a bit. And the detail that you put in some of these paintings, like scales on tarpon or bonefish or a mullet or a mutton snapper or whatever you're doing, he said people don't see that detail, and just be careful that you aren't wasting a lot of time and effort on stuff that is never going to be appreciated by the viewer. So he said, loosen up, don't get so tight. And it worked not so much on the small pieces, which I like to have the tight detail, but on the bigger pieces, he said, paint with a broader brush and see what it does for you. And it was very good advice.
Broader brush, you mean thicker, literally.
Bigger brush, literally.
Yeah.
And don't be so obsessed with every single sea lice or every single scale on a fish's face.
Don't be so accurate, right? Don't be so perfect.
We you see, an art connoisseur, wildlife art connoisseur called Dave Wagner, who wrote the authoritative book on American wildlife artists, was doing an interview about my work, and he said, I think quite rightly, he said, no, the question to him by the journalist was, why is Guy Harvey's work so accurate? And he said, that's not the right word to use. And so he asked me what would be the right word to use. And I would say more authentic would be the right word to use, because I spend time in the water like no other marine artist ever has, because I want to get close to my subject matter. And this is what Kent was saying. He being, doing a lot of land animals, North American big game, African big game animals, spent a lot of time in the field, basically. A luxury which we underwater painters don't have, because you have fleeting seconds with the animals,
right,
depending on what you're trying to look at. So you have to really make the best possible use of that moment, and you can't always capture it on film because it happens too quickly, as you know.
Well, what about the movies, the TV show that you had, Portraits of the Deep, where it was all video? Did that help a lot?
It did. In those days, the camera housings, a Gates camera housing weighed 50 pounds, and you were lugging this thing around you in the open ocean, chasing a shark or a marlin or a manta ray or something. And what made the big difference, Andy, has been the GoPro. Because A, the quality, but B, the smallness of it, the lightness of it. And your swimming speed is almost unaffected by carrying this wonderful little gadget with you that takes such incredible shots.
But a GoPro is such a wide angle camera. You have to get really close to the subject. And
so we do. We don't. When I was doing a lot of filming, and Jessica's much better at it now than I am, you would just swim up to the animal. Like, I'll never forget trying to film a sailfish eating a fly in Guatemala with Tim Choate. Jump off the boat at the same time he casts the fly, and the bite, you got it on film. The fish would start shaking its head like this, and you couldn't really zoom. So what you do is swim as fast as you can right up to the fish, like this close, right here.
Crazy.
And then, of course, it will go, it can't get the thing out of its mouth, so it goes off.
Wow.
But we'd always just try and accelerate to the fish to get the close-up shot. And I think while we're talking about the billfish, the most exciting animal to film underwater is definitely a free-swimming blue marlin. They are amazing, and we did it for years. We started in the mid-90s filming free-swimming billfish for that series, Portraits from the Deep, which ended in 2007 with an entire series. All 13 episodes were on billfish. It was a lot of work, but we got some very cool footage. Some of it very difficult. Filming free-swimming black marlin on the Great Barrier Reef was kind of sketchy.
Because a lot of sharks there too.
Yeah, a lot of them. But because the fish are not traumatized, there's no there's no drama in the water, and the sharks would just swim by.
So would you drag teasers to tease the marlin in and then jump out?
Exactly like you're fly fishing.
Do you remember I mentioned that to you before when I had my TV show, Sportsman's Journal? We did a marlin show in St. Thomas, and I purchased 11 seconds of film of a big marlin that you had shot chasing, swimming up to a teaser.
Okay.
And that was back when you were doing that.
Yeah.
Was there ever one situation where you really got scared and thought, "Oh my God, what? I'm over my head now"?
No, we never get into that situation. The one good thing about having the big, robust Gates camera housings was when you're filming like tiger sharks or oceanic whitetips, you put the camera between you and them, and they would touch it, or they just mouth it gently, and then they get the message. They go away. You never had to hit them or fend them off.
Sure.
You just put that in front of you. With the GoPro now, it's slightly different.
Right.
So you need to have, when you're filming sharks in the open ocean, you have to take a stick with you or something at least 3 feet long, just to keep them at bay, not to poke them, but just to deter them from coming any closer.
That works well.
Yeah.
Was your passion for art, did that always exceed your passion for fishing?
They really evolved together,
Yeah.
and I think the more I fished, the more I saw. Certainly, the more I dived. And going back to the diving, there's nothing that can substitute you from getting in the water, whether it's with a bonefish or a permit or a bass or whatever you want to paint, and seeing it in the water, in natural light. And of course, the challenge with the bigger fish is to keep them around long enough that you have a reasonable experience with them. And this is where, in the fads in Costa Rica with Skip Smith, we did 5 expeditions out there, not to catch blue marlin, but to go and film them. And we would get these, we started pulling teasers, but the handoff wouldn't happen because he was trolling fast. There's a lot of bubbles in the water, obscure your view. So I said, Skip, let's try live bait. We can just rig them, no hook, and have 2 out, 1 on each outrigger. 3 divers ready to go. We were all wearing pony tanks as well. And we're properly geared up. And the key thing is not to let the marlin eat the bait. Because once he's got the bait, you ain't letting go. It's going to be bang, and you're going to break your outrigger or something's going to happen. So the first time we tried it, we were just slow trailing 2 knots around the fads. And the wake is clear, of course, because there's no bubbles. So here he comes, all lit up, comes up on, say, the left rigger, and the mate just yanks on the halyard. The bait flies out the water, so you can't see it. Well, they can, but they can't get it. And then he comes across to the other bait on the right side, and he drops his back in the water. He lifts his up, and you got him going back and forth across the boat.
Like a seesaw.
Oh, beautiful. No,
Sorry
it's all right.
Nope. It's all good.
And
Just keep continuing. I'll grab a towel.
Yeah.
no, I got your paper wet there.
No worries. No worries.
And I wish I drank more.
We're all
And
good.
so it really worked extremely well. And we kept some marlin around for up to 9 minutes in all different color phases. And talking about learning, Nick, the coloration of a blue marlin when it comes in on a teaser like that, it's absolutely jet black like this microphone.
Oh, it's black.
Yeah. And you wonder, well, how do they achieve that? Why aren't they striped up? Well, except for their tail, which is actually a fluorescent blue color. It glows like a light underwater. But their feeding color, and sailfish too, is absolutely black. No counter shading. And then as they cool down, or they get less, excited, you see them have more pastel colors and stripes come up.
And the striped neon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we filmed, sometimes the one trip, we might film 50 different blue marlin in 3 days.
It was probably more fun to swim with these fish than to catch them.
Absolutely was.
But
Absolutely.
But was there ever a time when you got on the boat and you said, I don't want to bring a paintbrush or some pens, and I don't want to bring my camera. I just want to fish today.
That happens many times. And we do fish a few tournaments where there's not much opportunity for diving. There's a time constraint as well because you're competing. So I do enjoy that too.
Yeah.
But I really prefer fishing with family and friends. And so without the sort of pressure of a tournament.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you ever get painter's block, like writer's block, and you just
Never.
you see just a blank
Never.
page?
No.
you always have something.
No, it works the other way. I have so many ideas in my mind all at once that I want to convey onto canvas or the paper. And some of them sit there for a year or 2 or 3 years. And this was what happened in the pandemic, was it gave me the opportunity to catch up because we couldn't travel. and I stayed in Grand Cayman for 16 months without getting on a plane during 2019, 2020. And I was more productive than I ever had been ever in my life.
You were not distracted.
No, and you couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't even go fishing. The rules were so strict at home.
Mm-hmm. I was looking at Meltzoff's book here earlier today, and he'd had like a big shark in his studio.
Yeah,
because of the anatomical accuracy
Right.
that you were talking about earlier.
Right.
Do you ever do that yourself and have like molds of fish that you can set up?
No, the only fish that let me get this right. I take a lobster, a typical Caribbean lobster. They're very detailed, and the colors are very variable. So I would look at the lobster.
Pilar bottle and the Wickles over there.
Oh.
You don't mind?
No worries.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, you got.
Let me just ask you.
We got to
again.
get the sponsors back in here.
You got the tidal wave going.
Water can't escape
the
you,
tide
guy.
came in right. Really pretty. It was a full moon tide.
Yeah, there was a little hurricane surge there.
It's all good.
No, so it works the other way around, and even though I have responsibilities with, say, the apparel manufacturer to do new designs specifically for them, and there's a couple of techniques I've developed for that. I largely paint for myself or for people who commission me to do something specific for them. But let's take going to Panama. I've been going to Panama since 1991 to Tropic Star. I've been there probably 120 times.
Wow.
And you would think, well, what else are you going to see that you haven't seen already? Well, every trip is different. And you see different stuff all the time. And we dive all the time out in the ocean on trash lines, on logs, on bait balls. Anything interesting that we find, we've got the gear with us every single trip. If we're tagging fish, we want to follow down a black marlin. You want to see how do they recover from the trauma of being caught and released, and at what point do they, instead of doing this glide down, which forces water over their gills very quickly, they're not swimming, they're just gliding. At what point do they sort of go flat and go horizontal and start swimming under their own steam? Because they, of all the billfish, are the ones who are a little delicate, let's put it like that. And the problem with the oceanography of the Eastern Tropical Pacific is that there's an oxycline, or an oxygen minimum there, down around 30 meters. So below that level, there's a lack of oxygen, not enough to sustain life for a big, active predator. So it results in what you call habitat compression, which is where the ability of the fish to swim is compressed into this top 100 feet of water, which is well oxygenated, and below that there's none, so that they can't go there and survive.
How do swordfish swim in 1,700 feet of water?
Well, they are an enigma, and they're not a billfish. Let's be clear about that. They're a product of what you call convergent evolution. So they've come to look like the billfishes, but they are far from a billfish. Their whole anatomy is completely different. Plus, they live in the deep ocean, which is they're not competing with all those epipelagic fish up there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Their anatomy on the inside or outside?
Both. They're so completely different. They're more like a tuna with a bill.
Interesting. What's the most fascinating fish that you've ever filmed or learned about?
Well, and also to add to the swordfish, they're also the most dangerous fish underwater.
Because they'll spear you?
They will spear you for no reason. And so we stopped diving with them.
Very interesting.
They're very dangerous.
Have you ever been false charged or charged?
Once in Venezuela.
Really?
Yeah.
How do you dive with them? You see them sunning on the surface?
No, we hook them.
You catch them.
Hook them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we were filming up for the Blue Planet that trip with about a 300-pound swordfish, and it went after everybody.
Really?
And we all just said, forget this. Yeah. You're better off just finding one, somewhere.
Right.
Yeah. But not often. You can find them at the surface.
Tell us about that one day you caught 2,000-pound marlin.
Which are hanging.
Estimated.
Yeah, aren't they in the Bass
Bass Pro
Island
Shops.
Murata Fish Company restaurant?
Yep.
That bar area?
So that was in 1997. Yeah.
That was Tropic Star.
No, that was Madeira.
Oh, Madeira.
Yeah. So we've been fishing with Stuart Campbell for 3 years in a row with his crew, Barky Garnsey and Spencer Stratton and Charles Perry, CP, one of the most famous mates in the world. And Stuart was really fishing for world records on 12, 16, 20 or 30 pound test. And the first year I went with him, it was in 95. The second day I was there, he caught an 872 on 30, which is the current world record.
Wow.
And then he the next year he lost that memorable shot where he gets pulled overboard because his wire leader, they use wire, not nylon leaders, snuck down on the rod tip. They had the fish at the boat, CP did, and he had to let go. And the leader cinched on the rod tip and just flicked him overboard with the harness on. And he's very lucky he's still alive because the boat was going at full speed reverse, if you remember. So the next year was a very slow year. We did 19 days with Stuart, caught only one fish, and I traded a day of fishing with Clay Hensley on a boat called the Freedom, a 28-foot Henricus, I think it was. And I'm trying to get this right. Kent Ulberg came out. No, I took my mum to the airport that morning, so we had a late start. She'd been there for a few days. And Kent Ulberg flew in that evening. So we went out. We were late. The fleet had gone over to the Desertus, which is a bunch of rocky islands about 15 miles to the east, to try a new area. And we just had the right fish come up, caught him on an 80, her on an 80. She was foul hooked in the back of the dorsal fin, and luckily had a loop of the leader around her bill, so I had leverage on her face. Otherwise, we would never have got that fish. Right. And I dived with it when we got it up to the boat. I wish I wasn't on the rod because the jumps were so good. I wish I'd been behind the camera. They were spectacular. And I swam with her for a little bit. I had a Sony in a little housing with my arms around her, and she had another leader coming out of her mouth. Very heavy nylon, maybe 800-pound leader, so it could have been commercial. And she swam off beautifully. We put them out. We said, we're not going to get to the Desertus now because we'd spent an hour and a half on that fish. So we turned back around. We all had a beer. I hadn't got halfway down my beer, and here comes another one. Bait and switch again. And it was just like an F-16 behind the boat. You know, these fish are enormous. And that one took a bit longer. And I was going to swim again, but the mate had the leader for the third time and broke it off. So we never got a real good picture of it by the boat. Mm-hmm. But it was like back to back, and goodness gracious, in the circumstance of a really slow week, it was like, how do we do that?
Right. You got hit by a
lightning
bolt.
I'd rather be lucky than good any time, you know.
No question.
But that was an exceptional experience. The other big marlin I swam with was the 1,200-pound black caught in Tropic Star.
Right. That's with the famous photo of it jumping right behind the boat.
Which I took.
Yeah.
Yep. I dived on that fish 8 times, and the 7th time I went down with the Amphibico housing and camera because we were trying to clip another line onto the 50 because it was on a 50, this enormous animal. And so I swam all around her. I couldn't get up to her because she was just too strong. And I filmed it, and there's tons of the screen grabs in my book about Panama. And I said, I'm going to get you next time because she was not bothered by me being there at all. And she was just swimming along at about 70 feet, nice blue water. And I got down the next time with a 80-pound line, clipped it on, psh, ding, ding, you're on, let's go. And it was 40 minutes to gather up. And Bill Shedd was the other angler.
Is that right?
Yeah. That fish was easily 1,300 pounds. And I knew because the leaders they used then in Tropic Star were only 15 feet long. And the hook was on the right side in the corner where it should be, circle hook. And the swivel was about 3 feet past the tail. So if you add another foot on for the lower jaw, it's probably a bit longer than that. She had a short length of at least 13 feet.
Wow. And
the average grounder that they kill in cairns and places is 11 feet short length. So this is way past. Mm-hmm. 2 feet past, and she was very fat down by the anal fin. Had good girth all the way down. A monster. And we tagged her with a satellite tag.
It's got to be one of the most beautiful marlin photographs ever taken.
I got lucky because we had a film crew there from Bonaire, and we had put the whole fight lasted 5 hours. We put the producer Ken Kavanagh and the cameraman on Neil Patrick's boat. He was the angler, IGFA trustee at the time, and his wife. And the other cameraman stayed with me. We went fishing for a bit. We came back. We did the dives, all that stuff. Got back in the boat, and we were filming the fish, and we were right next to it. And I just bent down to do something, and the fish jumped on the leader. I looked up, and all I saw was a splash. It was like, you idiot. Pay attention. But luckily, it jumped again, and that was the shot.
That was the photograph.
Yeah.
So you reeled that fish in, you swam down there, attached the 80 to the swivel, and you took that photograph.
I did not reel the fish in. That was Neil Patrick. He caught that on another boat, and we were filming for the Billfish series. Mm-hmm. And we had been driven off the reef by the bait stealing bottlenose dolphins. We caught one about 400 pounds just outside Bill Shed. Caught it, and beautiful blue water. I remember diving with that fish and getting the fish with the tag, swam down to about 80 feet with it, and had it going away in the shot, and it was beautiful. And then we just heard that this other boat had hooked up, so we said to Ken, let's just head on over there and see what they got. But the fish didn't jump at all for the first 20 minutes. And then when we were about 300 yards away, it came out of the water and went, holy moly. Look at the size of that. Let's stay with this program. So we went over there, and it was the mountains in the background, perfect sunny day. I mean, what a scene.
Wow.
You know? And so we stayed with that for 5 hours.
It's hard to imagine that you see this fish jumping, and a little while after that, you're down there swimming with it, attaching like an 80, to, this.
Well, they thought the fish died because the water there is very shallow around the Penis Reef, they call it. Mm-hmm. It's misnamed the Zane Grey Reef. It's actually called the Penis Reef because Zane Grey never went there. But it's
romanticized it, yes.
Romantic association. So having seen this fish jumping around the place, we said, if it's dead and it's stuck in the mud like many black marlin do in that shallow water, they're mud darts, some of them. You can do a bounce dive because they had full 80 cubic foot tanks. Do a bounce dive down the line, clip on another line. And you guys can lift it up. You're not going to do it on a 50. And I got down to the thermocline, and the water went from blue to green in like 3 feet, and you could barely see in front of your face.
Wow.
And right in front of me was this big old tail moving along. And I said, she's fine. Went back up.
So tell me about how they get stuck in the mud.
They die.
So just after a jump, they come down. When they're trying to go down and fight against the line, they just go straight into the mud.
I don't know what it is, but they either give up or for the large size they are, black marlins are not nearly as hardy as a blue marlin, and we learnt that. Their mortality is slightly greater than blues when we do the tagging work. We know, but it's like they have a buildup of lactic acid or something that really stops them from swimming. And they roll over at the boat sometimes when any other marlin would be paddling along, a white or a sail or a striped marlin or blue marlin. They're paddling along, they're doing their stuff. They just roll over and they seem to give up.
Really?
That's why releasing them responsibly is so important. You got to drag them, get the water over their gills, and release them so that they don't go into this oxycline I was telling you about.
It's interesting. It's very similar to tarpon.
Yeah.
Because the tarpon, you fight them. You can't grab them until they're on their side. Then all of a sudden you get them on their side and you go, okay, it's time.
That's it.
You grab them, slide the fly out, then motor the boat, slowly, get the oxygen going, and then they swim off. So it's just like black marlin. Right.
And we use a snooter on their bill too to hold them away from the boat.
Right.
And if you do it, they will come back.
I don't know who told us this, but I remember them saying when they were fighting a couple marlin and they were just swimming against the drag, and all of a sudden nothing was happening, and then they were reeling in just dead weight, And when they got the black marlin to the back of the boat, their gills and their mouth was just packed full of
mud.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Kinda
you take
wild.
them in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they don't go to waste. The black marlin is called the white marlin by the Japanese because of the color of the meat. It's not an oily meat. It's very nice compared to the rest of the billfish.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
When did you first see something was happening in the ocean and you wanted to do something about it?
Goodness gracious. It's been a slow, very perplexing process where you see overfishing in particular happening. There are other consequences of other anthropogenic influences on the ocean, but overfishing was the first thing you really see, especially growing up in Jamaica, seeing with all the trap fishing and spearfishing that happens there, what we call indiscriminate fishing, net fishing, gill nets and stuff like that. How just in the time I was doing my PhD, which is 4 years, how the fish populations of anything from herrings and sardines to jacks to mackerels to reef fish in particular were just plummeting. The populations were plummeting. Without, in a developing country, without any real proper management plan. And just the amount of parrotfish and surgeon fishes and all the reef fish that were caught in these traps, just by the cajillion. It was very, very sad to see. In other places, let me think. You see the coral as well decline in quality, and
is that the red flag that something's going?
Well, that can be the result of other influences.
Okay.
So overfishing is through basically through indiscriminate fishing. So fish traps, gill nets, bottom long lines, all that stuff. But the story, the offshore story, the demise of sharks through the shark fin trade. Our institute, through Professor Shivji, really put a light on that by infiltrating the Hong Kong shark fin trade in 2003, 2004. Two students measured the amount of basically fins that were being processed in the shark fin trade, and by extrapolation came up with a figure of 40 to 73 million sharks a year being killed in the shark fin trade alone, which is totally unsustainable. And that was 20 years ago.
Wow.
So heavens knows what that figure is now. Probably a lot less because there are a lot less sharks. But that's another indication. And you look at other, keystone species like the plight of the bluefin tuna, which for 2,000 years was sustainably fished by the Romans, by the Phoenicians in the Mediterranean through their fixed fixed barrier nets. They call them the almadraba there. And there's a whole story about that in the book Portraits from the Deep. One of the best adventures I'd ever had. How they were sustainably fished, and the Roman army marched on dried, salted tuna, basically. They had a production system going. But come the Second World War and the advance in electronics, sonars, radars, depth finders, the ability to catch any fish anywhere, basically. And again, you introduce indiscriminate fishing, that's long lining, purse seining, that captures a lot of fish that you're not targeting as well. You put huge pressure on the bluefin tunas. And today, the fad fishing for yellowfins and skipjacks, the tuna populations have suffered from enormous overfishing efforts around the world. It's not just the Caribbean.
So they're targeting things not in open water, but around fads.
Well, they put the fads there because they work.
Uh-huh. Right. Are they banning any of that kind of fishing at all?
Not right now. You have jurisdiction over your own 200-mile exclusive. Let me say that again. You have jurisdiction over your 200-mile exclusive economic zone, each country. But beyond that, it's a free-for-all. Yeah. So that's where we're deficient in having some sort of system of carving up the ocean and having responsible management done.
You mentioned that because I remember a long time ago I was fishing Cabo San Lucas and we were yellowfin fishing. And the Japanese boats were out there,
Yeah.
and they were talking about, well, there's a barrier, but they sneak inside
night.
that barrier at night and demolish. They just put a net around this entire school and just poach them.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that there's any way that you can ban these guys or prohibit these guys from getting into certain waters, right?
Well, it becomes a government-to-government relationship then, or exercise in terms of, trade and negotiation and who's the bad guy and what do you want to get out of it. You look at the Chinese now that have, for the last 3 or 4 years, really surrounded the Galapagos and that channel between the Galapagos and the mainland South America. So you've got Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Panama, Costa Rica, all up the line, all trying to keep these people away because there are no rules and regulations for them.
Right.
And on the other side of it, they're buying, in inverted commas, fishing rights through your infrastructure improvement in your own country. So they want fish food for their people back at home, and they're swapping aid for access. But most of it is just absolute poaching. And they switch off their AI
There's no
assistant.
international police force for protecting all these fisheries.
So the interesting thing is now that the U.S. government has taken a big interest in illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, IUU fishing. And they reckon it's probably the second or third biggest consideration now, apart from human trafficking and drug trafficking, is illegal fishing.
Wow.
So it's become that important.
They almost need like a NATO of a fishery, where all the countries band together to protect these fish, these tuna and these billfish and all the fish that are being decimated.
Well, as you and I know, they're far more valuable alive, the billfish anyway, than being consumed.
Yeah. So what kind of evolution have you seen in Panama, having been there all those years, 100 and sometimes? Is that sustainable there, or what's happening there?
It comes and goes. The Panamanians are very lucky in that they have a very productive piece of ocean that keeps. It's a yellowfin tuna factory, basically. So in the Bay of Panama, and either side, north and south, there's so much primary productivity that everything grows well and fast, in spite of all the fishing that happens. The adult tunas move, obviously, up and down. They go offshore. But how can I say this? I think I've probably met 4 or 5 different Panamanian presidents. Their term of office is like 5 years, and every time there's a change of government, you have to start all over again. And it's just
There's no stability.
Well, there's stability, no continuity in terms of just policies.
Consistency.
Yeah. And every one of them is subject to a bit of this and a bit of that, and, Chinese and everybody else who has influence. It's frustrating is the word I was going to use.
Sure.
We make lots of recommendations to them, which are based on science, and having spent so much time there. But somehow their fisheries, and if you look at the catch record at Tropic Star Lodge for billfish in particular, and also Dorados, mahi-mahi, they're very consistent. And blue and black marlin seem to be doing okay. They had their best year ever of sailfish this year. It's just like, so what's going on? We need to spend more time studying it.
Interesting.
But we never give up. That's the thing. Is you got to keep going, keep the work going, keep the research work going. And what we find with the black marlins is that they're, after 5 years of tagging, they're a lot more retentive. I.e., they don't travel that much like a blue marlin or a sailfish. They kind of stay in Panama and
like
Ecuadorian water.
A resident fish.
What I saw is West Side Story. What I saw is just a ride. What I saw is West Side Story. What I saw is just a ride.